Hi and welcome to RCKicks. On today's show, well, we're going to be back working on the Team Losi JRX2. Now, I did a video a month ago maybe, and if you haven't seen that, I'll put a link up here, go check it out. But it was a Halo car that I was desperate to get to add to the collection, and a very difficult one to find, especially in the UK. But after I did that video, a lot of the die-hard Team Losi fans, who know way more than I do about this one, pointed out a few issues with it. Turns out this started out as a JRX-T, which is the truck version. The chassis is slightly longer, and also it's had some modifications to it, even though it is a really nice chassis. And I can kind of see this is very old and very rare, so someone at some point has decided to change it up a little bit. And being that this chassis is in pretty decent condition, as in the amount of running it's done, there's only a few scratches on the back here, that it was better to use that than a more damaged one. A lot of people commented, and I did say if anyone could find one. It turns out there's a company called Bazerk that actually make chassis for it. The problem was they're outside the UK, so as you can imagine, the import costs and all the shipping gets really expensive. But luckily it gets even better. The UK distributor happens to be LandLModels, Lee. So I spoke to Lee about it, and he said he was just about to put an order in. So I said, oh, can you get me these? Now I had a quick look online, and they did a carbon fiber version of this, and then they did this one, which is FRP. Now this is the LO202 JRX2 replica chassis. Now I didn't go for the carbon fiber one because I wanted to make this look more original. I didn't want to pimp it up, and I don't plan on running it, so I went for the FRP one because it looks very factory, which is brilliant because I wanted to make it look as shelf queen as possible. Now, a few people commented that these towers are the wrong ones, so I ordered the towers for it as well in FRP, not carbon. So what we're going to do is we're going to swap out the chassis on this, and then we're going to fit the new towers, and hopefully that's going to make it look a little bit more spiffy. Also, it should shorten up the chassis and make it work better with the body. The only thing that I'm missing now is a proper bumper, or an aftermarket sort of upgrade vintage kind of bumper. This one's 3D printed, and then it's been filed down, and it looks okay, but I'm not a big fan of 3D printing like that. But if I can find one, I had a look this morning. There's some in America, but obviously importing them into the UK is a little bit expensive. And then before you know it, that's a £70 bumper, which I don't want to do. Also, while I'm doing this, we'll talk about a few other bits and pieces that are going on. I've did a few little off-camera upgrades to things like my 10th Technology Predator. So I've fitted new carbon parts to that. So I'll have a show of that, as well as talk about a few bits and pieces that are going on in the RC world. So it's a bit of a mishmash one, this video, but stay with me, should be a bit of fun. So let's upgrade this beautiful vintage RC. Just before we dive into the JRX2, I just wanted to let you know that I'm running a raffle for one of these, a Egress Black. New in box, will come to your door free of charge. Also, all profits that are raised from these tickets, I'm also going to be doing 2 free giveaways. Yes, you can get a ticket for absolutely nothing for 2 other cars. The idea about doing that is to try and give back. So there's a lot of people out there that are finding things very expensive, and unfortunately the last thing on their list over Christmas is to get themselves some RC good stuff. So what I thought I would do is, for everybody who's buying tickets for this, I'll take some of that money and then I'll do raffles for other RC cars so that people can enter those for nothing. So hopefully they'll end up going to people that probably weren't going to get any RC for themselves, as they're putting all their money into their bills and their families for Christmas. So that's the idea about giving back a little bit. So if you'd be interested in getting a ticket for the Egress, or if you're not getting any RC stuff this year, definitely want to get on those free raffles, as it's not going to cost you anything. So you could end up with an RC kit under the tree after all. Thanks very much. Let's get back to the JRX2. Right, let's crack on and get this one done. Now, this is quite a rare car, so replacement parts are an absolute nightmare to get if you can find them at all. So when you're doing any kind of work to these, you've got to be really careful. You don't want to strip a screw, or you don't want to crack any parts at all. So the stress level when you're working on things like this are a lot higher, and you have to go a lot slower. You've got to be careful when you remove every screw. You don't want to strip anything, or break any small part inside. And obviously this is a very old RC, so the plastics are not as strong as they once were. Luckily, being a plate-based kind of RC, you can do this modular, so you can do the back section first and then do the front. Whereas some vintage buggies, you build the whole buggy around the chassis and the chassis is part of the drive line. And that can be a real challenge as you're dismantling it, as it's much easier to break parts on a car like that. But here, where it's just a plate on the bottom, luckily it makes my life a little bit easier. Everything's going together really well and everything's lining up really nicely. I'm really chuffed that I decided to go with the FRP chassis from Bazerk, as it just looks factory. So I'm really happy with it, and I think it would be difficult for people to really realize that this is a replacement aftermarket chassis versus an original one, which is the kind of look I was after. When I placed my order with LandLModels for this chassis, I also decided to go with the towers. Now, a lot of people did comment that the towers were incorrect for this car, but when I received them from Bazerk, these towers matched the towers that I had on the car as well. I thought that the towers that I had were the incorrect ones from the JRX Pro, but it turns out these are the correct ones. I did look at the actual manual, but the images that are drawn in the manual don't seem to match anything at all. So if you really know, are these the correct ones? Comment below. While I had the car apart and the rear tower off, there was tons of dust behind it, so I gave it a quick clean before fitting the new tower back onto the car. Now apparently these shocks are notoriously bad for leaking. Now they feel fine, but I did find a little bit of oil seepage that was kind of splattered around the bottom of the arms, but they did feel like there was enough oil still in them, so I'm not going to mess with them for now, as I could end up breaking something or just making them worse. So that's the rear end of the car done, and I'm happy to report that was a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. Now we turn our attentions to the battery mount. That's only 4 screws. Also, you notice that they don't all match. That's something I'll cover later on, but it's a simple swap over. As you can see, this chassis only has the 4 holes, whereas the actual vintage one, someone had drilled another set, and I'm guessing that was done so that they could put an extra cell in the car and get it lower down. Right, now that's done, we can turn our attentions to the front of the car, and this is where I'm a little bit more concerned, as I definitely don't want to break anything on the front end. Now the first thing is this servo. I've got to remove that. Now on the original cars, there was no servo mounts at all. In this chassis, someone's drilled a hole and actually mounted a single servo mount. But I'm going to go back to how it would have been originally, and I'm just going to use some double-sided tape and stick it down. I'm definitely not going to drill a hole in the new chassis. Right, there's 4 main bolts at the front, disconnect the steering, and then I can take the whole front section away. We'll deal with the tower in a minute, but the first thing we've got to do is take the steering off. Now, I was a bit concerned that this was going to be a bit tricky, but it turns out actually come off rather easily. Also, these 2 pivot pins, they came away from the chassis way easier than I expected. I was a bit worried I might round something off, as God knows when the last time this was disconnected. While I had them off, I thought I'd give them a little bit of a polish with a bit of Brasso and then put them back on, and it will look a little bit neater and tidier. So far, I don't want to jinx it, but everything seems to be coming apart really nicely. So there you go, another step forward for the JRX2, and yes, really happy with it. The fit and finish are lovely, all goes together reasonably easy. Next thing for this one, really, apart from, like I said before, getting the front bumper, there is a few bolts that aren't quite consistent. There's some hex in there, there's a few Phillips in there. So my plan next is I'll get the JRX2 manual, go through all the hardware, then try and order a load of hardware that's all the same so that I can go back through and just neaten things up, as there's some that are just a bit of a mishmash. Obviously, over the years of this car being slowly changed and modified, and people have used different bolts, so that's something I like to get rid of as well, because that really polishes it up and makes it feel like it hasn't been messed with. So I'll do that off camera next. Now, the big thing that you haven't seen is, yes, the new chassis is correct, so the wheelbase is now correct for this car, not the longer version for the JRXT, and it does fit much better with the body and it doesn't look odd around the front. But there's one issue, and it's quite a big one, and that is when you shrink down the wheelbase, the body mount locations come closer together. This body was made and created for the longer one. So that means the front body mount is now in the wrong place. It's too far forward, so I have to cut another one. So yes, that problem, that age-old issue of what do you do when the body post is in the wrong location. Well, I'm going to show you what I do, and I've done it to this one. And hopefully you can see it's not perfect, but without looking, I don't think you'd really notice. So the plan is this. I've created the new hole, which is further in, and I filed it out as normal, and it's all done and it fits nicely. Then underneath that is a original hole. So what did I do? First, I got a little bit of polycarbonate offcut. Then I cut a small section out to fit into the original hole. Once I've done that, and it takes a while because you've got to kind of mess around with it to get it to fit nice and snug. Now you want to make sure that there's no gaps. You want it as tight as possible so it just clips in. Once you've done that, what I do with my silver tape is I then back both locations of the body. Now this does two things. The first one, it protects the mounts. When you put it on and take it off, it protects the paint, and it means the body will last a little bit longer. So there's that benefit. The other benefit is it will hold that bit of polycarbonate that you put into that hole really well from the back. Also, it hides it from the back. So not only are we fixing it from the outside, but we're going to be fixing it from the inside so it looks better as well. Then once that's done, I tend to get a little bit of super glue or some kind of flexible glue, and then I put a small amount of it around inside where that plug is, and then it will seal it all off. Not crazy amounts, just enough to seep into the cracks around it, and then leave it to go hard. And then what you've got on the bottom, you've actually got the silver tape holding it in place. Then you've got the super glue or some flexible polycarbonate glue of some sort, whatever you got, it kind of works. And that gives you a nice solid plug. Then after that, you need to think about what you can put over that hole. And the reason you have the plug and not just put a sticker over the hole is it will dip down and you'll see it. So having the plug nice and flush means that when you put decals over it, the hole then disappears. And that's basically what I've done here. Then the next big challenge is to try and find a decal that fits over that hole without looking out of place. Now that is the real challenge, and you've got to mess around. And I think I've kind of got there with this one. I kind of mishmashed it around a little bit. Now in a real sort of, if it didn't have the hole, I'd have that a bit lower. But I think without just looking at it, you think it's kind of normal, and that's good enough. Ideally, what I'll do in the future is you can get aftermarket bodies of this. Is next time I need to place an order with MCI decals, I'll order a set of these decals. Then you can get this body quite cheap. And being that it's only painted in red, it's not a massive amount of work, and I will swap it over and change it out for the same one. But honestly, being a shelf queen, not really going to be a problem. So that's how I fixed that issue that I didn't see right until I put the body on. And then I spent the best part of an hour fixing that issue. But overall, the car's taking another step forward, and that's fantastic. And since you stayed to the end, another little project that I've been slowly working on over time. Some of the very rare cars take a lot longer to find all the little pieces to slowly improve them to get them back to really nice quality, and making a whole video on it is kind of impossible. But my 10th Technology Predator XRS has now got a front carbon front mount. It has the rear bulkhead in carbon, also the 2 battery mounts for the saddle packs. I now have those as well, where I only had one. It came with one, but I've now got 2, and they're branded as well, so they look the part. I've also got a carbon steering bridge, but I've got to take the front off to fit that, and that's a bit of a big job, so I'll just wait on that. As obviously with cars like this, you've really got to take your time when you're dismantling and putting them back together again, is if you round off something or break something, good luck trying to find a replacement for it. So sometimes working on these can be a little bit more stressful to just get them right. And another one I've been tinkering with in the background is this, my built used 501X. Now yes, I still have the 501X new in box sitting off camera. I'm just waiting to get all the body back before I start doing that, as I don't want to do a chassis build and then have to wait for the body to turn up, as I'm not sure when I'm going to get it back, but hopefully soon. So I sent an email off to the painter, who's a YouTuber, and hopefully I'll get some information back from him when he's going to send them, so that I can then schedule in building up the 501X. Anyway, while I was waiting for that in the background, I've been tinkering with the built one, as I want to run this on the show at some point. So after having a good look at it, they had a few issues, suffered from some friction problems. Turns out the actual gear diff in the back is rubbing a little bit, so I had to modify that. This originally came with bull diffs, but you could modify it to run a gear diff in the back, but it tends to rub on this bulkhead, so you have to adjust that. So I trimmed that down a little bit. Also, I was having a little bits of friction problems when I put the wheels on. You do up the nuts too tight and it all binds. That was another thing. The belts that were in this car were pretty worn out, so I bought 2 new belts, and then I refitted them all, and then I give it a bit of love, and now it's much smoother. It now runs lovely and smooth, much better, because it was locking up at the rear, so it feels much happier. But then when I was looking through it, this has been used, so it's obviously had a bit of a hard life. It's been run and raced. So another thing that I thought I would upgrade while I was in there is to set the belt tension as you adjust like cams. And they look like they're a bit worn, and they've been used and they've been adjusted and adjusted. So I managed to find some brand new ones. So I'm going to go back in again when I do the final tightening up of the belts. And I'll replace them, and that should give me a much more precise belt tension, which is very important for these, because you don't want to get too much friction and you don't want them to be too slack. So and there's no front tensioners in this. Another thing that I had to do was sort out the turnbuckles. There was a whole mishmash of random ones, so I managed to pick up the correct 501X turnbuckles, as well as the upgraded ball cups, which are the stronger grey carbon-y ones, I think they are. So I fitted those as well, so that's back to stock. So there's still quite a way to go with this one. I'm going to give it a little bit more love, but it now runs a lot smoother. Still need to sort out a bit of slack on the back and the front, but it does feel much better and seems to be a lot happier in itself. So that will be on the show again, and then I'll be taking it running. But what I'll do is I'll actually build the kit when I get the body back, and then after I've built that one, that will be the whole building content, and then we'll take this one and run it around the track a few times just to see what it's like on carpet. And a car that's actually returning to the show, so for anybody who's been watching for a while, you might recognize this. It's my Tamiya MadCap that was built on the show. Rebecca restored this one on the show, and this is an original body and decals that were all painted up. Now I sold this on quite a while ago. Well, I had the opportunity to buy it back again for basically what I sold it. So I thought, well, I couldn't turn it down. These have become rarer and rarer all the time, as I was really hoping that Tamiya were going to re-release it, but going on things that seem to be slowing down from Tamiya, maybe we just will never see it. So I thought, well, I'll spend the money. Madcaps are not cheap, especially if you've got vintage high caps, lovely brand new front tires, and the actual car is all original electronics, original body, original decals. The only thing that lets this car down a little bit is the chassis has a few little tiny marks where it's had some light running in the past. Now I have been looking at getting a chassis for this. There's a few of them about, but they're demanding a lot of money, and the minute you buy it and fit it, you're going to lose quite a lot of it, as this car is not cheap anyway. So I think it's probably not worth spending the kind of money that people are asking for the chassis to just take it to that slightly higher level. I don't think if I ever came around to selling it again, it would get anywhere near that money back again. But it's lovely to have it in the collection, as it's one of those cars that when I first saw it in photographs, wasn't keen on it. When I got it and then restored it, I realized just how beautiful it is, and then I sold it off because someone offered me good money for it. But now it's back again and it will go back into the collection. So watch this space. Maybe next month Tamiya will release the Mad Cap and you can pick it up for £125. Right, I think that pretty much covers everything. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. There is tons coming really soon.